Hello, welcome to video number 3, and thanks for coming back and listening to me ramble on a little bit more, hopefully. If you have found your way to this recording without having seen the other 2 recordings first, I do encourage you to return to video 1 and 2. We've covered a lot of things, a lot of background to explain a little bit about what it is that we're talking about. So in the first video we talked about what influences our experience of life and what are the factors that are some. We started the discussion about what are the factors, what are the things that contribute to our experience of life. And then in video 2, I started a discussion that had to do with the importance of the childhood period and how this influences our experience of life. And we talked a little bit about this idea of the inner child. And I just started that discussion to try to introduce a few basic ideas of what it is, what are some of the things that are involved in what is influencing our life. So, so as I've been looking back over those videos a little bit, it's been a few days now since I did those, so I'm looking back, and it occurs to me that I realize I'm probably not exactly a very exciting speaker on the recording, so sorry about that. As I said, I'm not really not a public speaker. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not an inspirational speaker. And I kind of get this feeling of hearing someone sitting there watching this going, dude, this is really boring. Why am I sitting here watching this? And I can get that. I can understand how we might be going, what is this all about? What are we trying to get to? Why are we talking about these things? What is the purpose? So I've been pondering this over the last few days about, do I kind of input a little something here, a little break in the train of thought? What I'd like to do is get on into the effects of the childhood and how this affects our subconscious. And I alluded to that a little bit, but I wanted just to touch a little bit on why should you sit and listen to me talk when there is a lot of other materials that are out there in the world that are probably a lot more entertaining. And I think that was the word I had in mind, that I realize I'm probably not a very entertaining speaker. So sorry about that. Sorry also that this is not some professional produced video. And but it is what it is, and it's just a place to try to start from, to try to get some of these ideas down in some way, and hopefully somebody can benefit from that. And I have debated over, do I address the idea of what some of these other materials that are out there, what they are offering, and how what it is that I'm talking about, how that is different. What is it that I'm offering that is different? So there have been many materials over the years that have been brought out, things like the power of positive thinking, how to influence people, how to win friends and influence people, or whatever that book is called. And just to mention a couple that comes to mind, there is a whole school of teaching that's out there that's about positive thinking, that if you change the way you think, that you will change your life. And for a lot of people that works, obviously. I personally found that those kind of materials, things like affirmations and just think positive, did nothing for me. And so this video is, in a way, or this series of videos, in a lot of ways, is oriented toward people like me, people that find that these materials that are based on things like think positive, that for some of us, those things don't work. And I may have mentioned this, that each person, one of the things I found along the way is that everybody's version of what they experience is different, it's unique to them. Some things that work well for some people do not work for other people. And as I said, all of those things, nothing seemed to work for me. So the thing that we're here to talk about is what I found that did work. So if you're a person who doesn't particularly have problems in your life, this is probably not going to have much interest for you. If you're one of those people that is a go get 'em, we just decide what we want to do, you set your goals and you create the lists and you go out and you take the actions and do the stuff that they tell you that you're supposed to do, and you get the results that you chose or set up or had intended, and that's what works for you, that's great. You're probably not going to be that much interested in what this set of videos is going to be talking about, because what I'm talking about is what happens for those of us who that doesn't work. Another thing I wanted to kind of touch on is there are a lot of people that have brought things out to the public that have been very popular, very successful. And this is, sorry, I was trying to decide which direction I was going to take that comment into, and it had to do with the warm fuzzy feeling talk. I'm not one of the warm fuzzy folks. To me, this is like, let's get to what's really causing these things, what causes life to be the way it is, and let's figure out what we need to do something about this, because the warm fuzzy thing is not really helping. So, but a lot of people have been very successful talking in ways that creates a very nice, warm, comfortable, feel-good feeling in their talk, and that works for a lot of people. A lot of people seem to like that. I personally have not found that to be effective in actually changing the conditions, changing what happens, the way things occur. But there have been those many, and I keep wanting to mention some of them. I mean, in the past, one that comes to mind is Wayne Dyer. I have a lot of respect for Wayne. Wayne accomplished a whole lot in his lifetime. Another is Tony Robbins. Tony was one of the first that I encountered many years ago when I first got started in trying to understand these things, and he helped motivate me a little bit. And I picked up and learned a few principles from him. But I also found that a lot of his material, again, it just did not really seem to make a difference in my particular situation. A lot of people apparently do very well with his materials. But then you've also got people, there's Deepak Chopra, and there's Eckhart Tolle. Those are rather abstract in nature, and I understand a lot of the philosophical principles that are involved there. Have not found that, again, to be particularly applicable toward what to me is, I consider to be practical as far as we're living life here in this world, and how can we affect making changes if we do not like the effects that we've had so far. Oh goodness, so I'm not really sure how far to go into this. into talking about that. One of the things that has been I've been noticing lately is there's been a lot of popularity that has come up in the word shadow work. And this seems to be an idea that is saying that somewhere in us there is a shadow part of our being that is has those aspects that we don't want to face, that are maybe dark, that are maybe negative, and it was apparently this was begun by Jung many years ago, and he described, not studied into what he describes, but it has become popular lately in a lot of the online groups to talk about and recommend doing shadow work. I find that there are certain aspects of this work, the work that I bring out, the concepts and principles that I work with, that are similar, and that there are things that are buried deep down inside in what I refer to as the subconscious, that may be limiting, that may have a negative perception, that are at the I want to say at the base of it, the root of it, which there is a similarity there with the shadow work. From what I've been able to tell, from what I get a little confused about what exactly they are recommending as a method or a process of actually working with the shadow self. From what I've seen, they seem to recommend a lot of things that seem to involve crying, embracing the pain, being with the pain. There seems to be a lot of discomfort that's involved in that approach, and I agree that the accepting of things is probably important, and a lot of people do seem to get a lot of results from that. And I don't agree with the approach, the methodology of it. I don't find it very desirable. I've found that it is not really necessary to dwell in a lot of negative emotions. We need to acknowledge what the emotions are and then move on so that they can be cleared, as I say. And I have seemed to have traveled down a path and gotten kind of deep into this discussion. I'm not sure if that's needed at this point. It's just been kind of bothering me about trying to distinguish what it is that these principles that I'm working with, and to try to get a sense of why should you sit here and watch me talk. And there are some other methodologies that are out there that, and I don't want to get into that right now. So let's talk about this. What is it that we're really after here? So, if we have conditions in our life that we don't like, and this could be anything. So basically, the fundamental bottom line of what I'm trying to offer is the idea that if we have conditions, things, whatever it is that we don't care for, that we don't like, that's undesirable in some way or other, that what I wanted was some method or an approach, some way to remove that or to stop that from occurring. So as I began looking into the causes of, well, what started with a study of addiction, alcoholism, and that kind of led into the idea of dysfunctionality, all aspects of dysfunctionality. And that's what led into what I was discussing in the last video of the John Bradshaw materials, and that he began to explain that so many different conditions, we could say, in life that at those times we called issues in the old days, that we could say unhealthy, whether it's unhealthy behaviors, or unhealthy conditions that are showing up in our life. And these can be described in many different ways. So let's just explore this a little bit here about what are the stuff that we're talking about. So let's say anxiety, let's say depression, let's say stress, tension. Let's say, there used to be a phrase called getting your buttons pushed, or lately they've called this triggers. Let's say unhealthy behaviors, whatever those may be. So we could say phobias, panic attacks, low self-esteem. Let's see what else. Procrastination is one. Self-sabotage is another common behavior pattern, or another common pattern. Relationships is a big area that can often have a lot of unhealthy patterns that we can have about who we get involved with, the nature of our behaviors, our interactions in our relationships. These are just a few of the more common things. The interesting thing is what I found is that all of these various different patterns that we're talking about are similar in certain ways. So there are certain fundamental factors that are involved that are essentially occur the same regardless of what the pattern may look like. So let's think for a minute of something like the old cassette tapes. So when I was younger, cassette tapes were common. So, and this may not be something that you can relate with if you're a younger person and don't know what I'm talking about. That's sorry. But so a cassette tape had certain mechanical parts. There was a shell, there was a little wheel inside, there was the tape that moved around, and on the tape, the surface of the tape, was a coating, magnetic particles that were arranged in certain ways. So the mechanics of the tape was essentially the same regardless of what the content on the tape is. But the arrangement of the particles, the magnetic particles on the coating on the tape, those arrangements, when it was played on a player, would produce an infinite variety of different types of content, of different materials. Whether it's music, recorded voice, the same principle applies with videotape. So the content on the tape can vary infinitely, but the basic mechanics of what's involved was the same on all the tapes. Well, I began to find that there were certain factors, principles that I call them, about what influences our experience of life that had these certain fundamental sort of mechanical aspects. That the content within it may vary, but the way that these are combined together and produce the effects in our life is fairly consistent. It's like a certain mechanical factors involved in a cassette tape, for example. So these factors that I found, and I think we may have touched on this a little bit before, was that this idea that we have these three fundamental aspects of what makes us humans is the emotions, the mental, the mind, and the spirit, the beliefs. Now those things combined together record our tape. Those tapes, and this is happening during childhood, and those tapes are stored in what I call the inner consciousness. We can also call this the subconscious, which is another whole discussion I wanted to get into about the role that the subconscious plays in this. Now those tapes, once they're stored in the subconscious, they produce, whatever was recorded on the tape. And these show up in our life later on in life. So if those tapes that we recorded are material that is positive or beneficial or works well in life, then things are good. then we go through life, everything's okay, basically. You're one of those folks that life is good. That's it. Life is good. But for some of us, if we recorded things on those tapes that maybe don't work well with the way the world works, that maybe the way society is, that maybe doesn't function with the way we're told and taught, that the way the world works, or maybe we have what we might call limiting beliefs, or we had conflicts as a child of some kind, and the results of those conflicts is what got recorded on our tape, or maybe even mini tapes. And then those tapes are what show up and get played in our life later on, that turn into things that get triggered as we go through life by various circumstances and events that occur, and our triggers show up, buttons get pushed, and then essentially what happens is that tape gets played. We experience all of those same emotions and all the same thought patterns that were related to some kind of experience or something that happened, an event of some kind during childhood when we were recording our fundamental process that I call a configuration. And now I don't remember if I've explained the configuration process or not. We may have to go into that in more detail. So as I reflect on that, so let's see. I believe in the first video we talked a little bit about it during early part of childhood. We were in an ongoing process of observing life, interpreting things, forming conclusions. Now, those conclusions that we come to are what gets recorded on these little videotape, or these tapes that I'm talking about. And then if those are recordings that are, say, life is good, then there's not too much of a problem. We just kind of go through life and do what we want to do. But if those things that were recorded on the tapes might be something that sounds like life is hard, or life is not fair, and if we have a lot of emotional upset that was involved with that when that was recorded, then as we go through life and we encounter some particular set of circumstances that pushes that button and triggers that recording, that tape to play again, we re-experience all those same emotions, all the anger and the frustration. There might be fear, there might be a lot of things, anxiety. Those get triggered again, and we experience those same feelings that we did when we were 2 years old. And all those perceptions that life's not fair. Life is hard. And we may have many different occasions down through the years where we encountered that same tape. It's like a tape that's on replay, tape loop, and it replays. I call these things recurring patterns. So the work that we're working with here is about looking at where in our life do we have these recurring patterns that show up, particularly if these are patterns of something that's not desirable, like we have a negative reaction to something. It could be in our relationships. It could be that when some person says something in particular that we end up getting in an argument with them, or we blow up, maybe act kind of irrational, or something else happens and we get triggered into fear, we get triggered into panic attacks or anxiety. We have all of this fear just coming out and we don't know what to do with it. This is coming, and so what I've been describing has to do with where this stuff comes from. What causes this stuff to be happening? And it ties into our fundamental, like what I would call our mechanical system of being human. It's the mechanics of our system. It's just like I was talking about the tapes. And there's another part of our system that is the player of the tapes, and it plays those tapes back for us so that we re-experience that. Now, there's actually a good bit more that's involved with this. It gets pretty deep and very involved, but I just want to get across at this point that why are we talking about these things is because many of us have these things that show up in our life. So I could just simply say, hey, do you have problems with anxiety? Well, here's a solution. Or we could say, what other things do you have in your life that maybe you don't really like or don't really care for? Maybe it's like you realize that you have a problem with procrastination. Maybe you've noticed that you've got self-sabotage going on from sometimes, that you put your time and effort into doing something. Maybe you try to do those things that they talk about in some of these other approaches where they say, well, okay, so here's what you do. You decide, you choose your goal. You decide what those goals are, and then you set out your list of the steps that you need to carry out, that you need to perform in order to achieve your goals. And then you just take the actions. You take the action steps to do that. And maybe you've tried this. Maybe like me. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to do this. And it was always a recipe for a disaster, frankly. I got to where I hated the whole discussion about, oh, you create your goals. Because for me, goals was a guaranteed recipe for failure. I mean, I don't know if anybody else can relate to that, but that's the way it always worked for me. Or we go, okay, so I'm going to make it work this time. I'm going to create the goals. I'm going to figure out all the steps that need to be done. I follow all these steps, and I do all the action steps, and we get all the way down to the end where it's supposed to then work, and something happens, and it doesn't work. Everything falls apart. The whole thing just crashes and burns. Welcome to my life, and if you don't relate to any of this, fine. This may not be for you. But if you do relate to this, hang in there and watch these videos, even though I'm not particularly entertaining, and I'm sorry. But I've been at this a long time, and I have found things that work. And if we apply these principles, we can stop these patterns that I call them, these recurring patterns that show up. So, for example, the whole set your goals thing I was just talking about. So let's suppose that we've done this many times. And maybe we watched a seminar. And in the seminar, they say, okay, well, this is how you do this. You got to choose your goals, get you a pencil and piece of paper, figure out your why. I always hated that one. Figure out your why. Okay? And then they have some kind of like process that they give you to figure out all of the steps involved in the goal. Now, the interesting thing is that some of us may have found that we might go through, let's say 7 out of 10 steps, or maybe 8 steps out of 10. And somewhere around step 8, there's something about something we chose about carrying out that step, that we chose to do something maybe a little differently. And something about that choice made that step not work, which then sets up an effect for the rest of the project so that the whole project then crashes and burns. Well, what do we do about that? You know what that's called? It's called self-sabotage. Now, I've been there and done that. And if you can relate to that, we can do something about that. The thing is these patterns will continue to recur. They will continue to happen until we do something to address these patterns in our life and address the source of them and change that part of the inner consciousness that is causing this to show up in this way. I'm starting to run out of time to do the recording. I started off not knowing if I was going to have something really to discuss, and I hope we have given you some things to think about, giving you a reason to come back and watch the next video, because then hopefully we're going to go ahead and proceed on with what it is that happens, how the system works, and something that we call the subconscious, and how the subconscious contributes and influences our experiences that we have throughout the rest of our life. So I think the next goal, or the next video rather, is going to be about the subconscious. And I hope we have been a little more entertaining today, or if not, we've at least given you some reason to think that it's worthwhile to spend your time to come back and watch maybe a few more of these videos if I get them done. So, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.